Good morning and welcome to the Underbrush, a Lager Studios podcast where we uncover the secrets of marketing. I'm your host, Dakota Ward. I'm so excited to be joined here this morning by a dear old friend, a fatherly figure to myself, and generally just one of the smartest and kindest men that I know, John Adams of the Liberty Cigar Company. John, how you doing this morning?
I'm good. I'm so glad you said all that after you said I was old. Because you redeemed yourself, so you're good. Yeah. You don't have to go to your room now.
Yeah. I will skip the timeout session.
I'm doing great, by the way, to answer your question obnoxiously like that.
Good. Well, John, I've always known you as JT, so for the sake of my own sanity, I'm going to continue to call you JT on the show if that's all right with you.
Oh, I answer to both. Half my family calls me JT, the other calls me John, and then some call me things that I this is probably PG, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So. Fire away.
Yeah. All right. Well, cool. JT, tell us a little bit about, because I know you very well, but for the viewers that don't know you, give us just a little bit of background about yourself and then obviously about Liberty Cigar Company.
Well, I am just an average guy who loves his country, and we have a organization called the American History Guild, which is the parent company to all this, and our mission is to tell America's magnificent story, and one of the ways we do that is through cigars, but we also have done a few apps, and in the past we've got a couple of books that are coming out, a couple of children's books, and we do historic architecture, and you know that well. Your father is the architect extraordinaire in that endeavor, and but the cigars are probably my favorite, just simply because they're just so much. There's so much to them, the craft and the joy of smoking them, obviously, and the friendships that are kindled from it. So it's really extraordinary.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did Liberty Cigars start? What was the mindset?
Well, I smoked cigars since I was a young man, and every time I would smoke cigars, people asked me to tell a story about American history or something having to do with that. And I just decided after doing that for years and years and years that I would have the cigars tell the stories. And so we took seminal people in American history and honored them with a cigar. And each cigar is actually designed to mirror the personality of the one that we're honoring. So George Washington is big and bold and hardy, and James Madison, who was 5'2", weighed 100 pounds, is diminutive in size, and he had a mild disposition but a very complex nature, and so we replicated that in the cigar as well.
Yeah, I love that. And so you've got a whole slew of stuff in front of me. Can you tell me a little bit about what we're looking at?
Yes, actually. We have 3 different series presently. Actually, we have 5, but 3 in the historical realm, and one of which is the Founder series, and that is actually 15 of the Founding Fathers. There's 13 in the set, though, and that includes Hamilton and Adams and Washington and Franklin and all the big hits, if you will. But we also have obscure people like Robert Morris and Joseph Warren, who was the hero at Bunker Hill and unfortunately lost his head in the battle. But we also have the Commander series, which is George Washington and 10 of his commanders. And you have some great people in that series, Lafayette, for example. We also have Benedict Arnold, believe it or not. He was a hero at Saratoga, so we had to give him a great cigar, but we put his band upside down to dishonor him for his West Point debacle and being a traitor. So very interesting set. Each cigar, like I said, mirrors that personality. The last series, the presidential series, the White House Historical Association, we work with them to do a new president most years, and we've done Theodore Roosevelt, and this is the Early Republic series, and it's got 6 of the first 6 presidents in it.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. Isn't that cool? And each cigar, like I said, is different. James Monroe is probably my favorite at the moment. He was a big and bold man himself. And then the most recent one is the John F. Kennedy. We did that one in order to stay in keeping with their Christmas ornament. Every year they do a Christmas ornament, and apologize, my ears are slippery. The JFK ornament came out last year in 2020, and we debuted the JFK cigar.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. So being the history buff that you are, I don't want to go too deep into this because I know it's a longer conversation, but just the
Yeah,
history
how much time
of,
you got? The sun's still up.
yeah, we got all day. Just the history of cigars and kind of where they come from, and maybe some prominent smokers that people may know, may not know, or should know.
Well, the first Europeans actually discovered it not long after Columbus discovered America. They went into the bay in Cuba and went ashore, and two gentlemen actually observed the natives smoking these long cigars. It was actually corn husk with tobacco in it. They were 3 feet long, and so it's different than the cigar we smoke now. But
just a little bit.
Wasn't long after that it was imported into Spain, and of course Spain became the colonizer of Cuba, and so that's where the Cuban cigar was born. But in America, the tobacco is a little bit different, but it's reported that that Israel Putnam actually brought Cuban seeds up to the Connecticut Valley, and that's where the Connecticut shade tobacco was born. That is not 100% verified, but it's thought to be the case. He was shipwrecked there during the French and Indian War in 1762. So cigars have a wonderful history. Obviously, they grow in certain climates, the Caribbean climates, Cuba and Latin America, Central America, actually, with Nicaragua and Honduras. They're the best environments. There are some great tobaccos being grown now, cigar tobaccos in particular, being grown in Kentucky and places like that now. So I think you'll see some exciting new cigars coming out in the next several years.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So where are your cigars made?
In the Dominican Republic. The tobaccos from all over the world, from Brazil, from Peru, from Sumatra, from Honduras, Nicaragua. We have Cuban seed, no Cuban tobacco as far as you know that you can prove right now. But so they're really handcrafted there. And Juan Carlos Jimenez, the cigar maker, is just very patient with me as I try to craft a cigar that said, no, that was not quite right. I smoked 500 cigars to get the George Washington just right. And
my gosh.
Yeah, it was a lot of smoking. I was telling my wife at the time, I said, I don't know if I can do this anymore. But this one better be right, and it was. So thankfully, but it was really.
You almost got sick from it, right?
Well, I smoked so many because there was a deadline. We wanted to launch on July 4th, and so I was like, we got to get it. We have to age the cigars a certain period of time, and so I was like, we got to get this by next Tuesday or what have you. So it was kind of fun, but yeah, it was. You shouldn't smoke. I smoked.
Shouldn't have 500 cigars.
Yeah, you shouldn't have that many in a week. But I wouldn't smoke the whole thing. But it's a big cigar. It's a
big cigar.
Big 60 gauge, 60 ring gauge. So it's a big cigar.
Yeah, doctor's orders no more than 300.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, cool. So give us just a little bit of insight. I know the answer, but I want to ask it is the deeper meaning kind of behind why you're doing this, why it's so important for us to know the stories of these guys.
There's a lot of answers to that, but the prominent one, the two prominent ones are, the first is, I think as a country, because really the entire world, but certainly America in general, has lost its capacity to revere. I think because everything is instantaneously available, and you can literally get a PhD on your phone if you wanted to. I mean, I've actually taken chemistry courses from Stanford University on my phone, and when I was doing an app on called the Dinner at the Periodic Table. It's I think people think because everything's at the ready, they don't really have to go deep into anything anymore. And in the olden days, Jefferson has in his Sanctum Sanctorum has the famous pictures of Locke, Bacon, and Newton. Those were his three heroes, and he knew everything about them and knew their idiosyncratic ways and everything about them. And so he was able to form his own self from that basis, and I don't think we do that anymore. And these men and women are extraordinary. When I say women, I'm talking about the women of that generation, like Abigail Adams and some of the ones that we will never know their names, but they formed that generation. It's interesting. I've interviewed a lot of World War II vets, and to a man almost, they always shy away from the greatest generation sort of mantra and tag for themselves. They believe that the greatest generation was the first one, as do I. And of course, the World War II generation was brave, and they were extraordinary, and they saved the world literally. But they were trying to preserve the world that the first generation was trying to create. And so,
Sure.
And you just look at these; they suffered so much. There weren't medicines available at the time. I mean, even as recently as Calvin Coolidge's presidency, his son was playing tennis on the White House tennis court and got a blister, and it got infected, and he died.
Wow.
Because we didn't have modern day antibiotics. And so the world was quite different in those days. And so for them to sort of navigate their way through the world was truly extraordinary. And they forged their character in that sort of rough and rugged world that was largely unsophisticated at the time, but it was hardy, and the people, men and women alike, were both sort of created from that sort of cauldron of uncertainty. And I just think it's worth studying.
Yeah,
that's the one thing, and then the other thing is that if you don't know our history, then you don't know the future. And Daniel Bornstein, the former Librarian of Congress, once said that trying to understand the future without knowing the past is like trying to plant cut flowers. I mean, it looks fine for a day or two, but after that, it becomes to wilt, and that it comes to wilt. Excuse me. But I think that understanding the difference between cut flowers and those that are planted and tended to and bloom every year is a totally different. It's lost on this generation. So I'm excited to do this. We've got 76 different cigars.
Wow.
Which was just by happenstance. I love the number, but
I was going to say, was that on purpose?
Yeah, maybe we don't have any more because it's such a great number. But yeah.
Well, and I mean, it speaks to the tagline is each cigar has a story to tell.
Right.
And so, as you know, I worked there for a couple of years, and
absolutely,
and I learned more history about these men than I think I really did about cigars. And so, in selling,
absolutely, yeah, that's the plan. Yeah,
in selling these cigars,
my dastardly plan works. Yeah,
yeah, I know. Over there, a minute's like, So I'm in the shop and I'm telling these people about guys like Robert Morris and they're like, what's the cigar like? I mean, you've been standing here for 30 minutes telling me about this guy that I really don't care about. What's
awesome.
The cigar like?
Oh, that's music to my ear. That's awesome. Yeah.
But that's what made it fun, right? And so when you're sitting down enjoying a cigar, you're not just sitting there in peace and quiet. You might be, but oftentimes you're having a conversation. And so, what's the conversation about? When you're having a Liberty cigar, it should be about history. It should be about these guys.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, Robert Morris is a perfect example. He basically wrote the checks for the Revolution.
Yeah.
He actually physically wrote the check for Washington's army to get from New York to Yorktown. And that's an extraordinary thing. He died penniless because he had exhausted all his reserves.
Well, and he got punished for it, right?
They threw him in jail.
Yeah,
yeah. It's like thanks a lot. If you're having a bad day, read about Robert Morris and the thankless life that he lived. But
yeah. That is so awesome. So, I'm curious. Where did this love for country start? Was it something in a childhood memory that you can relate it back to? Where did the importance of just knowing American history and just the love and passion that you have for it?
Well, I had a good fifth grade teacher, and she really loved this country. And I remember we were tasked to write out the Declaration of Independence, trying to mimic. And that's, she called it the birth certificate of America, and that's what it is, literally. Yeah. We would handwrite it, and she gave us a special paper to write it, like a thick paper, and at the end we put lemon juice on it, and then we put it on the Bunsen burner, and it turned into that beautiful aged parchment, and she had us tear little bits of it so it looked like
it looked real. Yeah,
I think I had that thing. My mother probably put it somewhere, but she saved it because she knew how important it was to me. And I was fortunate enough to grow up then in fifth grade, and we were leading up to the bicentennial of 1976. And prior to that, we had the moon landing. I'm old, so I was 4.5 when Neil Armstrong named stepped on the moon. And, I remember in 1972, I was watching television. There were only 3 channels back then, and it was just ridiculous compared to today. And so the Harry Truman's funeral was on, and we had no choice but to watch it. But I remember Walter Cronkite or the commentator mentioned that Truman's grandparents actually knew Revolutionary War soldiers.
Wow!
And I thought, and of course that was in 1972, long before you were born. But it's obviously within my lifetime. And of course, I met Harrison Tyler, he's still alive. His grandfather was John Tyler, and John Tyler actually had breakfast with George Washington and Martha Washington. He was
that is so cool.
And he was president in 1841, and his grandson is still alive, which is incredible. And Harrison, like I said, John Tyler had, as a 9-year-old boy, had breakfast with Washington and George Washington and Martha Washington. And I just thought we're really not that far removed from it. And in those days we were sort of imbued it, and there was a little bit different sort of attitude towards how extraordinary this country truly is. And I'm hoping my little corner of the world will help keep that little sacred fire of liberty, as I call it, alive.
Yeah. And so I titled the show today, Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness. And
awesome.
When we were talking yesterday, you said there's a little bit of a deeper meaning and kind of a history behind that. Do you care to share about that?
Sure. They were, first of all, the Founding Fathers were more deeply steeped in human nature and understood it better and in its effect on self-determination than any generation before or since. They truly looked at the old empires, and they grew up with Shakespeare, who grew up with the morality plays, and so they really had this sort of grasp of understanding of human nature, and so they tailored the country to that. And life at the time, as I mentioned before, was very fragile, and it was fleeting. But even then, before Crick and Watson discovered DNA, they knew that people were unique and that they were worthy, and all men are created equal, as they said. And of course, that promise was not realized at the time, but they set in motion it did. But life was fragile and fleeting and precious, and they called that out in the founding documents. And liberty was really about justice. You hear the word social justice all the time, but what does that mean? Obviously, social hopefully means the interaction of humanity and all the great virtues, kindness, et cetera, et cetera. But justice has different meanings for different people. I don't think people think about that. But to them, there were 3 different types of justice or liberty, and the first one was akin to your 5th grade teacher, that when you pulled out a pack of gum and she said, well, if you don't have enough for everybody, then you need to put that back. And that is, I guess psychologists call it utilitarian justice, where the most good for the most people. I call it the 5th grade teacher justice. But and the next one is sort of Aristotelian or even biblical, wherein the eye for an eye, or as Aristotle put it, you pretty much get what you deserve type justice. And that has its flaws because just as utilitarian or a 5th grade teacher does, because in the case of utilitarian justice, if you're saying the greatest number of people get the greatest benefit, then you're literally saying that everybody needs to split the wealth. So you would go to Oprah, I would suppose, and you'd say, well, you've got $2 billion. Why don't you just give it, share it equally with everybody on the planet? Well, what is that? A quarter apiece? It won't last. And so they looked at sort of that type of justice is not perfect, and neither was eye for an eye. As Gandhi said, everybody would walk the world blind eventually, because everybody is, man is fallen. But and so they look at the more Kantian or Lockean justice, which was individual, and individual rights were sacrosanct and they were important, and that is the basis of the country, is that it wasn't really about the collective, except through the lens of the individual. And each individual's right was important, and it was to be respected. And I think that's their definition of liberty. That as long as you don't, they looked at it, and I call it a two-sided coin, where you have freedom on one side of the coin, the other is responsibility. And even though they're distinct and separate, they're connected, and they're you cannot disconnect them. And so that's what their definition of liberty was. I hope this isn't too esoteric.
No. This is great.
And then the last one is the pursuit of happiness, which is the most intriguing to me, because I take for granted that I'm alive, and I take for granted that I live in this country and I'm at liberty. But the pursuit of happiness to them, if you go back to the Webster dictionaries in the 18th century and early 19th century, that happiness meant to them, the definition was the ultimate fulfillment of God's plan for you. That's what happiness meant. There's a great book out called The 4 Layers of Happiness. It was written by a Catholic priest, I think, but it just talks about the bottom happiness is, a chocolate bar, or a great day at the at the park or what have you, and then at the top is the transcendental happiness, where you which is what the founders were talking about, and that meant the ultimate fulfillment of God's purpose. Being the best person you can be, and that's why you look back at all of these extraordinary people. You got to remember that Philadelphia had 40,000 people in it, and out of 40,000 people, which is half the size of Mercedes-Benz Stadium. There's Benjamin Franklin and Benjamin Rush and all these extraordinary people. And in Boston, you had John Adams and Sam Adams and John Hancock, and Boston was 25,000 people at the time. And to have all these extraordinary men, Charleston was 40,000 people, and New York, and had Hamilton, and obviously the Tidewater area had George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. In this tiny little 2.5 million person country, we had all those extraordinary people, and it's because they were stretching themselves and reaching. And that is just such a worthy lesson for us now, when we have such leisure and such ease in our life, comparatively speaking. I just think it's that pursuit of happiness for them was just constantly improving, constantly getting better, refining your position, realizing that at least a third of your firmly held beliefs are faith, meaning that you really don't have any empirical definition, empirical evidence to define it. And they knew that. So they were constantly evolving. And except for a few, they were humble. It's truly extraordinary, because the humility that we have today is practiced and not really genuine. I think Benjamin Franklin, he worked hard at it, and he was a truly humble man, although he was just my superior, and everybody that I can think of superior by a long shot. So.
Well, he was also the old guy in the room when this all started. He
was, but as a young man, he wrote down his 13 different virtues, and each week he would concentrate on each one. His autobiographical sketch is just fantastic. I would recommend that to everybody, even now, even though it's 2 centuries old or more. But he forgot one. He forgot humility, and he was told by several people that he had forgotten humility as one of the, and so he realized that he was not humble.
Was it because he was so humble that he forgot to put it down?
Yeah, I'm the most humble person who's ever lived. And so he realized that even though he was going through this extraordinary exercise, he was in his 20s. He was younger than you, in fact, when he wrote this. When he had this experiment. He did that, and by the time he got to, as you mentioned, he was the old sage, and he was the extraordinary one of the room always. He was the one that tamped down John Adams during the Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress, when he was, wagging the sword.
Yeah, I think one of the bigger lessons that I've learned, just kind of being a part of this and reading a little more about this, is just the importance of physically reading.
Sure.
Because today, I mean, it's so easy to sit down and watch a 2-minute clip of, what was the news today, or I don't want to read this book. I'll just go watch the movie because I'm done with the story in 2 hours. But what you miss are all the finer details. You miss the significance. You miss the dialogue in someone's head because you can't replicate that in a movie.
Right. I call that the death of nuance, which is what we're listening, because technology cycles, I remember when I was young, technology cycles were 3 years. They had the same Buick for 3 years. Basically, they changed the headlights, and that was about it. But now they've probably condensed down to 3 weeks. They may even be 3 days for all I know. I'm old, but I just think that's very true. And so what happens when you read, particularly if you read the book more than once, every book on my shelf I've read 3 times, simply because when I read it the first time, it belongs to the author still, because I haven't quite grasped it. When I read it the second time, we share it, because I'm starting to grasp some of the concepts, et cetera, et cetera. When I read it the third time, it belongs to me forever, and I never forget it. And so, but when you're watching a movie, to that point, the director and the cinematographer and the writer, and they all get to interpret everything for you, and you have no say in it.
Yeah.
You're sort of this passive viewer. And when you read a book, as Elizabeth Browning, I think she said, it takes you lands away, and you're able to see the scenes, and when they describe a mountain brook and the meadow and the flowers and the just before that's the still before the battle, and you get to see that. And when they talk about the British coming up on Bunker Hill and their white pantaloons that just were stained red with blood, and from marching up the hill, and they lost 1,000 officers in that charge. It was extraordinary, and if you read that, then you get to feel the grass on your legs. You get to see the blood-soaked pantaloons in your mind, and it's very visceral in that regard. So I agree with you.
My dad very well, and at a young age, he told me, because I hated reading.
Yeah.
Hated
Oh
reading.
yeah.
I wanted to go outside, play in the dirt,
Right.
kick a football or whatever, and. He said to me, Dakota, if God didn't want us to read, he wouldn't have made the Bible a book.
Right. That's right. Yeah. He would have gone ahead and flash forwards.
Yeah. All right, guys. Here's your iPod. Sit down and watch it.
Made
listen to it.
A YouTube video, which would have been cool. I mean, the burning bush and all. But I think you're exactly right. And I think. What's interesting about that, I talked about Shakespeare earlier, and how, to me, he was the greatest psychologist to ever live. When you read his work and you truly understand what he's trying to convey there, the nuances of emotions are just, extraordinary. And there's always a morality-based, because he grew up with a literal morality plays as a child, and Shakespeare was his writings were the next generation of that in Elizabethan England. But you can really say, you know what, I've always felt that, but I've never known how to describe that feeling or that emotion, and now I know it. And Hamlet, and when he talks about, or Macbeth, when out brief candle life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage that is heard no more. You think about that. I mean, he just described someone's entire life, signifying nothing. And how you can have an empty life having lived 70 years or what have you. And that all of his plays are extraordinary like that. So and I'm not telling you haven't lived life if you haven't read Shakespeare, but to your point, you can't get that. I don't care how good looking the female star is, in her Elizabethan garb. You can't get it from the movie. You got to read it. I
love that. So because this is a marketing show.
I was wondering why we were here.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about how you're using marketing to share these stories and to share the Liberty Cigar Company.
Well, the great thing about the cigars is that the George Washington, for example, takes 3 hours to smoke. And if somebody makes the huge mistake of sitting down with me and smoking a George Washington, they cannot help but learn about the life of George Washington and really the entire founding of the country. And so that's one way. I mean, because cigars are very, very, they're meant to share. And of course, there's nothing better than a Saturday afternoon. You're all by yourself on the back porch smoking one, and you're contemplating your existence in the world. Yeah. But there's also a real good value and deep value in sharing experiences like that. So that's the main way. We are. I'm working on Humidor History, which I'm going to do. I wish I was as handsome as you, but I'm going to be the old guy, and maybe Photoshop. I don't know, but I'm going to sit down and I'm going to
The beauty of technology.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to be 25 and handsome, but I'm going to sit down and tell the 2-minute stories of all of my cigars, and there will be dozens and dozens of 2-minute stories for each of them. So so Humidor History is going to be one. And then I think I've got a book that I'm writing about cigars. I'm going to talk about the 10 different virtues of cigar smoking. And we also do a lot. We have a mobile humidor, and we go out. And my wife loves this stuff. It's not terribly profitable, but we've got a giant 8-foot picture of George Washington on one side of the van, and then another 8-foot picture of Hamilton on the other side, and Theodore Roosevelt's on the back, Bully. And we drive that to different events and set up a long 20-foot God Bless America Star-Spangled tent, and then lay out all our cigars. And that's really the most effective. We get a lot of business out of that ultimately from a marketing standpoint. And then we do the stuff with the White House Historical Association. We go up and sometimes do the Christmas parties up there. You've done those with me. Thank you. I hope you'll do them again, because I have a lot of fun up there with you.
I would love to.
Yeah. So we do that kind of thing. But and then the typical we just got featured in Cigar Journal magazine.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So
yeah. When was that?
In the spring issue, still out. Same one. Yeah. It's just a little blurb. It's a bilingual magazine. So on the one page you have it in English and another in Spanish, and it's kind of interesting to see that.
Oh wow, yeah. So I've never read the magazine. Yeah,
it's actually the number one magazine in the world, but it's number 2 in the United States behind Cigar Aficionado. So it's big everywhere else in the world, but it's number 2 here. So.
Interesting. As far as cigars go, number 1 in the world for cigars.
Yes.
Okay.
It's the number 1 selling cigar journal in the world. But
wow.
The guy just called me. I shipped some cigars to New Jersey, and he happened to have one. I just loved it. So that was very kind of him to write the article.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, a lot of word of mouth, right?
Yes. This is, as far as I know, unique in the world. Hopefully it'll remain that way. But so that's good. It's an interesting product. When I tell them exactly the construction of the George Washington cigar and how I came to it and why I chose the leaves I did and the construction, that's fascinating to people, some people at least.
Yeah.
So
how far are you going to go as far as creating these cigars? Are you going to go very close to recent history? Or are you going to get into celebrities like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who everybody knows he's a big cigar guy?
Well, obviously they're part of America's story. I have a lot of things on the drawing board, but you have to come up to the where the lawyers start to get a little antsy. So we have to be careful about that. But we started at the beginning. It was only through the White House Historical Association that asked us to make some of these other cigars that we did, the Herbert Hoover, for instance, and we were going to start in the beginning and just go forth. But the newest series that we have coming out is called Duo Libertas, and it's Latin for twice free, and it's about the black soldiers in the Rev War who are virtually unsung. People know about the Boston Massacre and maybe Crispus Attucks' name, but that would be the extent of it. But if they remember, there were so many brave black soldiers in the Rev War, and we're doing that series. And I've got a gentleman named Thomas Lively, for instance, and he was suffered at Valley Forge, and then he has his right eye shot out at Monmouth. Then he gets captured at Charleston after getting wounded in the leg, spends a year on a prison ship, and then gets released in a prisoner exchange, and then limps all the way to Yorktown to see the victory over Cornwallis. And he could have escaped at any of these times. Certainly being wounded, he could have been furloughed, but he kept in the battle, even though they were only 5% of the soldiers, because the condition of their their service was that they had to serve for the duration of the war. They represented about 20% of the fighting on a per man basis.
Wow.
And that's extraordinary. They were at Bunker Hill, and they were at every single battle, and they were just extraordinarily brave. And the reason it's called Twice Free is because they were fighting for their country, and then on the condition that they would then be freed themselves. So that's why it's called Duo Libertas. So I'm really excited about that series because I have people in there that are obscure. There's a woman named Mum Bet. Her name was Elizabeth, but that was her nickname. She had heard on the square in Boston after Sam and John Adams wrote the Constitution for Massachusetts. They read it, the town crier read it on the square, and she happened to be in the market, and she heard what they said. And,
wow.
And she took, which was now the law of the land in Massachusetts, and she took that piece of paper and went to court and got herself freed. And the tenacity and the boldness with which she did that was just extraordinary. So she gets a cigar. It's a little Panatella. It's a little small cigar, but it's got a little punch to it. It's because she did. So,
as it should.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you had a gentleman named James Armistead, who was a slave, and he was obviously fighting for his freedom, but they set him up as a spy in Boston. So he would go in and into the Boston, and he would snoop around and feed the Washington's army the intel. And then after the war, Lafayette, who was extraordinarily gifted in his own right, got him freed.
Wow.
And so he changed his name to James Armistead Lafayette. And Lafayette, he loved Lafayette. He loved his name, and so he owed a debt to him, I suppose. I think it's the other way around, and that's the way Lafayette saw it. So pretty extraordinary. Lafayette himself was extraordinary in that regard, in that he bought a sugar plantation in the Caribbean just so he could free all the slaves working on the plantation.
Wow.
Yeah. So he was pretty extraordinary.
Yeah. Those are some of the stories that you just don't hear anywhere, really, especially growing up in school.
Yeah.
You miss the nuances.
It's sad,
you miss the heroics of some of these people and some of the stuff that they really did that were just so far outside the norm at that time.
Yeah. And in Lafayette's case, he absolutely adored. He was 19 years old when he first came upon the shore, and his story is extraordinary. I mean, he was a musketeer, literally.
Yeah.
And he defied Louis XVI, King Louis XVI, and snuck out of France. And the musketeers were on his trail trying to capture him. And he convinced a tavern girl that he had flirted with to misdirect the musketeers, and was able to go to Spain and hop on a ship and come over. And he was so dedicated to the cause. And but he also, having a father and son like relationship with Washington, took a big chance and was probably the most influential person about Washington freeing his slaves, because he talked about if we're fighting for the freedom of humankind, then we should probably include everybody. And so I think he and Hamilton and John Lawrence, who was the son of the president of the Continental Congress, influenced a lot of the folks, Madison included, regarding that. So, these stories are incredible. I mean, I was just thinking as you said that, this is William McKinley. And most people don't realize that a black man, his name was James Big Ben Parker, 6'5", your height, but he was 250 pounds.
A little bit heavier.
A little bit heavier. He's from Atlanta, in fact.
Oh, really?
Was up in Buffalo at the exposition, and when the anarchists pulled out his gun and fired 2 shots into McKinley, at point blank, he had it under a handkerchief. Ben Parker was next in line to shake his hand, and he knocked him down and subdued him and kept him from firing again.
Wow.
And he saved McKinley's life until the doctors killed him. They oddly enough, there was Roentgen's X-ray machine was just yards away, and had they used that, they could have identified the bullet that was in the back. And
well, it was being shown, right? It had just been invented, and it was being shown.
It had just been invented, and they were afraid to use it. And in fact, they were encouraging them to go ahead and X-ray and find out where the bullet was. And the doctors refused because they thought it would kill him. They didn't know anything about it. And they were in the hospital that was set up, and it was dusk, and there was a nurse with a mirror trying to shine light on it, and it turns out they introduced pathogens into his body, and that's what killed him. But
oh my gosh, wow!
But James Parker saved his life, and had the doctors not killed him, which was also the case with Garfield, the doctors killed him too.
Arguably with Washington as well.
What's that?
I said arguably with George Washington as well.
No, you're thinking of Andrew Jackson.
I thought he had gotten sick, and they successfully bled him to death trying to get rid of the ammonia.
Oh, yes, the heroic medicine of the 18th century. Yeah, they were the bloodletting.
Yeah.
That's why the barbershops always have that. That's what that is. The barbershop is the red and blue. That's they put that sign up to
I did not know that.
To say that the barbers were the ones that did the bloodletting. But yes, he had a serious throat infection, and but it did weaken him to the point where. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, we're getting a little pressed for time, so I did want to give you the chance to tell everybody, how do they find Liberty Cigars? Where can they go to get them? How do they contact you? What's the best way that they can do that? LibertyCigars.com
is the place where you can order. It's all set up and ready to go. You can look at some of the stories there, or you can email me at johnadams@libertycigars.com, and we have a lot of new cigars coming out. Like I mentioned, we've got a Hispanic series coming out as well. That's the three Hispanics that were instrumental in the Rev War. In fact, the folks in Cuba raised the money for the Yorktown along with Robert Morris.
Oh, wow.
And they literally were at a party, and they were dropping their jewels into a bag to help fund it. So, and most people have no idea.
And Alexander Hamilton is also from the Caribbean.
The island of Nevis, yeah.
Yeah.
Out of all the founders, he came from the lowest to the highest in terms of his sort of spread of greatness. He was an orphan, motherless, fatherless. He was a lot like Andrew Jackson in that regard. But
Well, JT, it's been such a pleasure to finally get you in here.
Yeah.
I know we were supposed to do this, a couple months ago, and it was going to be virtual, and so I'm actually so glad that we got to do it in person because this is so much better. But for all the viewers out there, I hope you learned something this morning. If you haven't, go check out the website. There's a lot of history there that you can read there. But John Adams, founder of the Liberty Cigar Company. You're watching The Underbrush. I'm your host, Dakota Ward. Thanks, and we'll see you next week.